became the first American woman to ever land a triple axel in competition. It certainly made history.
At 54 years old, Tonya Harding is finally breaking her silence about the night that changed her life forever. For decades, she's been painted as one of the most controversial figures in sports history. But now, in her own words, Harding is sharing what she says really happened. Join us as we uncover Tonya Harding's long-awaited truth about that night and everything that followed. Rough beginnings. Tonya Harding's story begins far from the glittering world of figure skating fame. She was born in Portland, Oregon in 1970 to a working-class family that struggled to make ends meet. Her father, Al Harding, worked a number of odd jobs, including truck driving and maintenance, while her mother, Lavona Golden, waitressed and picked up whatever work she could find. Money was always tight, and Tonya grew up in an environment where survival was often the main focus. From an early age, Tonya lived with challenges that shaped her resilience. Her home life was not easy. Her parents' marriage was rocky, and her mother, Lavona, had a reputation for being tough and sometimes cruel. Tonya herself has described her upbringing as harsh, marked by both verbal and physical abuse. Lavona was determined that her daughter would succeed, but her methods were often extreme. She pushed Tonya hard, criticizing her constantly and demanding absolute commitment to skating. While Tonya has said that this tough love gave her discipline, it also left deep scars that stayed with her into adulthood. Despite the difficulties at home, skating became Tonya's escape and her focus. She first stepped onto the ice at just 3 years old, and it was quickly clear that she had something special. She was fearless and strong, able to perform difficult jumps that many older skaters struggled to master. But unlike the children of wealthier families, Tonya didn't have access to private trainers, designer costumes, or endless ice time. She often wore homemade skating outfits stitched together by her mother. She practiced at public rinks, sometimes in the early hours of the morning when ice time was cheaper. Everything about her training came from determination and grit rather than privilege. As she grew into her teenage years, Tonya's natural athletic ability started turning heads in local and regional competitions. While most young skaters were praised for their grace, poise, and elegance, Tonya stood out for her sheer power and technical skills. Judges were sometimes conflicted about her. On the one hand, she could pull off jumps that other skaters wouldn't even attempt. On the other hand, her style was less polished, and she didn't fit the traditional image of the delicate, graceful figure skater that many in the sport expected. Still, Tonya kept pushing forward. She worked endlessly on her jumps, especially the triple axel, a move so difficult that only a handful of women in the world had even tried it. For her, skating wasn't just about beauty. It was about strength and pushing boundaries. This focus gave her an edge and began to set her apart, even if the judges didn't always reward her the same way they rewarded skaters who fit the classic mold. And soon, the world would see just how far her determination and raw power could take her. Triple axel shock. By the early 1990s, Tonya Harding was no longer just another name in U.S. figure skating. She had developed a reputation as one of the most athletic skaters in the sport, and in 1991, she made history at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. That year, she became the first American woman to land a triple axel in competition. The jump was considered almost impossible. It required a skater to leap into the air facing forward, rotate 3.5 times, and land cleanly on one foot. Many skaters attempted it, but very few had ever succeeded. When Tonya landed it perfectly, the crowd erupted, and judges scored her routine with some of the highest marks of the event. That triple axel didn't just win her the championship, it placed her firmly in the spotlight. Headlines across the country described her as the working-class girl with impossible talent. She didn't have the polish or elegance of other skaters, but she had raw strength and the courage to attempt things no one else could. For a moment, she was celebrated as someone who had redefined what women in figure skating could do. At the same time, the media began to compare her to Nancy Kerrigan, another American skater rising in the ranks. Nancy was graceful, tall, and elegant on the ice. She represented the more traditional image of what figure skating had long been about: beauty, artistry, and refinement. Tonya, by contrast, was powerful, gritty, and unapologetically different. Where Nancy glided, Tonya attacked her routines with energy and strength. The media leaned into these differences and quickly turned their careers into a rivalry. It wasn't just about skating. It was framed as two completely opposite women competing for the same prize. After her win at the 1991 championships, Harding entered the 1992 Winter Olympics in Albertville, France, with high expectations. She had the skills, the momentum, and the media attention. Many thought she might medal, perhaps even win gold, especially with her ability to land the triple axel. But things didn't go as planned. Under the pressure of the Olympic stage, Tonya stumbled. She missed key jumps and couldn't deliver the same clean performance she had at nationals. She finished fourth, just outside the medals. It was a bitter disappointment, especially given how much potential she had shown only a year earlier. Still, Tonya remained in the conversation as a serious contender. She had shown the world what she was capable of, and she was determined to come back stronger. As the 1994 Winter Olympics in Lillehammer approached, the pressure only grew. She was no longer just skating for herself. She was skating to prove that her earlier success wasn't a fluke. She needed to show that she could still perform at the highest level and reclaim the image of being America's most daring skater. What she couldn't have known was that her fight to stay at the top of the sport was about to collide with a scandal that would change her life forever. Love and abuse. While Tonya Harding was making her name on the ice, her personal life was full of struggles that weighed heavily on her career. At the center of much of this was her relationship with Jeff Gillooly. Tonya married Gillooly in 1990, when she was still very young, and the marriage quickly became turbulent. The relationship was marked by constant fights, control, and abuse. Harding has spoken about the physical and emotional violence she endured, which often left her fearful and worn down. For someone who needed focus and confidence to perform at the highest level, living in such a hostile environment took away much of her stability. Gillooly also began inserting himself into her professional life. He was not just her husband, he became her manager and made himself part of her skating career. This created a situation where her personal and professional worlds were tangled together, and often in destructive ways. If their marriage hit a low point, it affected her training. If he made poor choices about her career, she had little control over it. The more influence Gillooly had, the harder it was for Tonya to separate herself from his decisions and the toxic relationship they shared. Beyond the problems in her marriage, Harding faced financial struggles that made it difficult to compete on equal footing with other top skaters. Unlike many of her rivals, she did not come from a wealthy family. Corporate sponsors, who often provided essential financial support to skaters, were hesitant to back her. Nancy Kerrigan, for example, received endorsements and corporate backing thanks to her refined image and traditional appeal. Harding, with her working-class background and tougher persona, didn't fit the mold that companies wanted to promote. This lack of sponsorship money meant she had to rely heavily on her own limited resources. All of this added to a sense of isolation. Harding often felt that she didn't belong in the elite world of figure skating, where many athletes came from more privileged backgrounds. She was judged not only on her skating but also on her image, and she constantly felt like the outsider who didn't quite fit the sport's expectations. The pressure explodes. By the time the 1994 figure skating season arrived, Tonya Harding was skating with more pressure than ever before. After the disappointment of the 1992 Winter Olympics, she knew this was her final chance to prove herself. The U.S. Figure Skating Championships in Detroit that January were especially important. They weren't just another competition, they served as the main qualifier for the Olympic team. If Harding wanted to go to Lillehammer and redeem her career on the world stage, she had to perform well at nationals. Harding was well aware of what was at stake. The Olympics were only weeks away, and she was determined to be part of them. But while she trained, the outside attention grew intense. The media had begun focusing more and more on the rivalry between Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. Kerrigan had taken silver at the 1992 Olympics and was seen as America's best hope for gold in 1994. She had sponsors, ad campaigns, and an image that fit the ideal of what many believed a figure skater should be. Harding, in contrast, was under constant scrutiny. Reporters frequently compared her to Kerrigan, often in ways that made her seem less glamorous or less worthy. The coverage created a sense of building drama around the two women, even before the competitions began. Behind the scenes, Harding's life was still complicated. Her marriage to Jeff Gillooly was officially over, but their relationship remained close and tangled. Gillooly was still heavily involved in her life, showing up at practices and managing parts of her career. He brought with him a group of acquaintances who were not part of the usual skating world, friends and hangers-on who spent time around Harding during this critical season. Among them was Sean Eckhart, Harding's self-proclaimed bodyguard, who was known for exaggerating his role and talking big about ways to protect Tonya's chances. It was in this environment that the whispers began. Harding was under enormous pressure to qualify for the Olympics. Kerrigan was her biggest competition, and people in Gillooly's circle started discussing ways to give Tonya an advantage. According to later testimony, conversations about stopping Kerrigan from skating began as talk and then grew more serious. Gillooly, Eckhart, and others would eventually become tied to the plan that led to the infamous attack on Kerrigan. Whether Harding knew about these conversations ahead of time has always been one of the most debated questions in her story. The baton strike. On January 6, 1994, the world of figure skating changed forever. Nancy Kerrigan was finishing a practice session at Cobo Arena in Detroit, Michigan, just 2 days before the start of the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. The arena was filled with skaters, coaches, and staff preparing for the event. Kerrigan, dressed in her training clothes, stepped off the ice after her session and began walking down a narrow hallway toward the dressing area. It was a normal day of practice until everything suddenly turned chaotic. As Kerrigan left the ice, a man rushed toward her and struck her on the right knee with a metal baton. The attack was quick and shocking. Kerrigan collapsed to the ground in pain, crying out loudly as those nearby rushed to help her. Cameras were present in the arena, and they captured the aftermath of the assault. The image of Kerrigan clutching her knee and crying, "Why? Why me?" became one of the most replayed and unforgettable moments in sports history. The attacker fled the scene almost immediately, pushing his way out of the building and escaping into a waiting car. The strike was brutal, but not career-ending, though at that moment, no one knew the extent of the damage. Doctors later confirmed that Kerrigan had suffered a bruised knee and would be unable to compete at nationals. For one of the top skaters in the country, losing the chance to skate at such an important competition was devastating. News of the attack spread quickly. Within hours, reporters were covering the incident across the country. The dramatic footage of Kerrigan's anguished cry made the story impossible to ignore. Almost overnight, figure skating, usually covered only during major events, became front-page news. The attack was shocking, not just because of its violence, but also because of the timing. It had happened on the eve of the competition that determined who would go to the Olympics, raising immediate questions about motive. Very quickly, the story took on the tone of a mystery. Who would want to harm Nancy Kerrigan? Why would anyone target her? Almost immediately, suspicion fell on Tonya Harding, Kerrigan's biggest rival and the other leading contender for the Olympic team. Though there was no evidence directly linking her in those first hours, the fact that Harding stood to benefit from Kerrigan being unable to compete made her a natural focus for speculation. And as investigators began digging into what really happened, shocking connections soon came to light. Secrets unravel. The attack on Nancy Kerrigan set off one of the fastest and most intense investigations in sports history. Within days, the FBI became involved, and it didn't take long for the case to begin unraveling. The attacker, Shane Stant, was identified after investigators traced the rental car he had used in Detroit. From there, the connections started to build, leading back to people close to Tonya Harding. The chain pointed first to Harding's self-described bodyguard, Sean Eckhart. Eckhart had been bragging about his supposed role in planning the attack, and word of his involvement spread quickly. When questioned, his story fell apart, and investigators were able to link him to Gillooly, Harding's ex-husband, who still played a major role in her life and career. Together, the evidence showed that Gillooly and Eckhart had hired Stant to attack Kerrigan, hoping to injure her enough to knock her out of competition and clear the way for Harding at Nationals and the Olympics. While all of this was unfolding, Harding still had to compete at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. The Nationals took place just days after the attack, and Harding skated under a cloud of suspicion. The media swarmed her every move, asking questions about whether she had any involvement. Despite the pressure, she delivered a strong performance. With Kerrigan sidelined by her injury, Harding secured her spot on the Olympic team. On the surface, it looked like she had achieved what she needed, but behind the scenes, the scandal was quickly closing in on her. As the FBI gathered evidence, the circle of people involved in the plot began to crumble. Gillooly, facing the possibility of serious prison time, decided to cooperate with investigators. He took a plea deal and admitted to his role in organizing the attack. His testimony was especially damaging because he directly implicated Harding, saying that she knew about the plan ahead of time. This claim immediately intensified public suspicion of her and made her a central figure in the case. Harding, however, continued to deny that she had any knowledge of the attack before it happened. She admitted only to learning about it after the fact and failing to report it to the authorities right away. As the legal battle continued, her credibility was questioned repeatedly. Many believed Gillooly's story because of his direct involvement, while others thought Harding might have been caught in the middle of her ex-husband's reckless actions. And soon, all of this would collide with the global stage of the Winter Olympics, where the drama would play out in front of millions. Fall from grace. By the time the 1994 Winter Olympics began in Lillehammer, Norway, figure skating had become the most talked-about story in the world. What had once been a graceful sport suddenly turned into a global drama, with Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan at the center. Both women had qualified for the U.S. Olympic team, Kerrigan after a successful recovery from her knee injury, and Harding under a cloud of suspicion because of the ongoing investigation. Their presence together in Norway created an atmosphere unlike any other Olympics before it. The media turned the Games into a spectacle. Instead of focusing only on athletic performance, reporters chased every detail about Harding and Kerrigan. Cameras followed them at practices, in press conferences, and even while walking through the Olympic Village. The storyline was irresistible to the press. Two rivals, one injured in a shocking attack, the other accused of being connected to it. The Lillehammer Games became less about sport and more about the unfolding soap opera of their rivalry. Nancy Kerrigan, however, made an impressive comeback. Just weeks after being struck in the knee, she returned to the ice with determination. Her performances in Lillehammer were graceful and steady, proving that she had recovered both physically and mentally. In her final routine, she delivered a strong skate that earned her the silver medal. It was a powerful moment, as audiences around the world admired her resilience. While she did not win gold, finishing second after Oksana Bayul of Ukraine, Kerrigan's comeback was seen as a victory in itself. For Tonya Harding, the Olympics were far more difficult. She arrived in Norway facing enormous pressure, surrounded by reporters asking about her possible involvement in the attack. When it came time to compete, her struggles showed. During one of her performances, she skated out, stopped, and approached the judges to show them her skate lace, which had broken. In tears, she asked for time to fix it, and she was allowed to restart her routine. But even after that, she was unable to deliver the kind of clean, strong performance she needed. Harding's routines were shaky and inconsistent, and without her signature triple axel landing cleanly, she fell far behind in the standings. Instead of a chance at redemption, the Olympics became the stage for her downfall. She finished in 8th place, far from the medal podium. The broken lace incident became symbolic of her troubled games, as millions of viewers watched her struggle under the weight of the scandal and the pressure. When the competition ended, Kerrigan stood on the podium with a silver medal, celebrated as the injured athlete who triumphed against the odds. Harding left Norway disgraced, her reputation already unraveling as investigators continued to build their case back home. The world had seen both women in one of the most unforgettable Olympic storylines in history. And once the games were over, the focus shifted back to the courts, where Harding's future in skating would be decided for good. Courtroom reckoning. After the Lillehammer Olympics, the spotlight shifted from the ice to the courtroom. The investigation into the attack on Nancy Kerrigan was still moving forward, and Tonya Harding could no longer avoid facing the legal system. The question was no longer whether the people around her had been involved. That was already proven. But how much Harding herself had known and when. The evidence against her was damaging. Phone records, testimony from her ex-husband, Jeff Gillooly, and statements from others involved suggested that she became aware of the attack after it happened and did not report it. While there was not enough to convict her of planning the crime, prosecutors argued that she had hindered the investigation by failing to speak up. The pressure on Harding grew, and in March 1994, she struck a plea bargain. Harding pleaded guilty to the charge of hindering prosecution. By taking this deal, she avoided jail time, but the consequences were still serious. In court, she was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered to pay a $160,000 fine. The deal also required her to undergo counseling. Though she did not serve prison time, the judgment officially tied her to the crime, confirming that she had played a role, even if not as the mastermind. In June 1994, the governing body announced that Harding was banned for life from participating in any of its sanctioned events. The decision meant she could never again compete as an amateur skater or be involved with the sport professionally in any official capacity. For someone who had dedicated her life to skating since childhood, it was a crushing blow. With skating no longer an option, Harding tried to find other ways to stay in the public eye. In the late 1990s, she made headlines again by stepping into the boxing ring. She fought in several celebrity and professional matches, often promoted more for the spectacle than for athletic skill. She also appeared on reality television programs and made occasional media appearances, but most of these ventures kept her on the edges of fame, rather than bringing her lasting success. Each attempt reminded audiences of her scandal, making it nearly impossible for her to build a fresh start. The silent years. After the whirlwind of the 1990s, Tonya Harding's life shifted away from the cameras and the crowds. Once the legal battles were over and her ban from skating was official, she had little choice but to step back from the spotlight. For someone who had been under constant media attention, this retreat into a quieter life was a major change. Harding returned to Oregon, the state where she grew up, and began trying to build a life far away from the skating world that had once defined her. During these years, Harding made only occasional appearances in public. She sometimes gave interviews, usually when reporters tracked her down, or when a major anniversary of the attack or the Olympics came around. But no matter how much time passed, every conversation with her seemed to circle back to that night in 1994. Harding's athletic achievements, the triple axel, the championship wins, and the groundbreaking routines were almost always overshadowed by the scandal. Even when she wanted to focus on other aspects of her life, she found it nearly impossible to escape the shadow of the past. One of the most significant changes in Harding's life came with her personal relationships. In 2010, she married Joseph Price, a man who worked in heating and air conditioning. Their relationship gave Harding a sense of stability she hadn't often known in her earlier years. Together, they built a quieter family life, far away from the cameras and controversies that had once followed her everywhere. In 2011, Harding gave birth to her first child, a son. Becoming a mother marked a new chapter for her, one that she has described as the most important and fulfilling role of her life. She worked hard to keep her child out of the public eye, determined to give him a normal upbringing without the weight of her past attached to his name. Living in Oregon, she focused on her family, everyday routines, and staying away from the fame that had once brought her both success and heartbreak. For decades, she stayed mostly in the background until the time finally came when she decided to tell her own story about the night that changed everything. Harding's long-awaited truth. After decades of silence and years of being portrayed in headlines, Tonya Harding finally began to share her own version of what happened during the scandal that defined her life. At 54 years old, she has spoken with more openness about the attack on Nancy Kerrigan, her involvement, and the years of pressure and pain that surrounded her at the time. For Harding, it has been a chance to explain what she says she lived through, and to separate her own truth from the story that was told for her. Harding has been clear about one thing. She denies ever having been part of the planning of the assault. She has said repeatedly that she did not know beforehand that Jeff Gillooly, her ex-husband, and Sean Eckhart, her bodyguard, were organizing an attack against her rival. According to Harding, she only learned of the scheme after the fact. This detail has been central to her defense for decades, and at 54, she has stood firm in her claim that she was not in on the plan that sent Shane Stant to Detroit with a baton. What she does admit, however, is that once she found out what had happened, she was too afraid and overwhelmed to act. She has described herself as living under constant manipulation and pressure, both from Gillooly and from the difficult life circumstances she was already facing. Harding has explained that she was scared of what Gillooly might do if she went to the authorities, and that she felt trapped in a world where she had very little power or control. To her, failing to report what she knew was not a choice made casually. It was a decision made in fear. Looking back now, Harding often speaks with regret. She regrets the choices she made, the people she surrounded herself with, and the silence that cost her so much. She has admitted that she should have come forward sooner, and that her failure to act made everything worse, both for Kerrigan and for herself. Her final word about that night is that she was not the mastermind, not the person who planned the attack, and not the criminal many believed her to be. She wants to be remembered for her strength on the ice and for surviving everything that followed, not only for the worst chapter of her career. And with her truth finally spoken, people are left to decide for themselves what to believe. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss more videos like this.